Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this episode of the Union Podcast. I'm Scott King, and I'm joined by a special guest, Julie Mohr. So Julie is an analyst over at Forrester and serves ITSM and all types of enterprise service management clients. Julie, what are you working on these days? Can you tell us a little bit about your coverage area and maybe what you're working on these days? And then we'll get started with talking about knowledge management.
Sure. So my coverage area is IT service management and enterprise service management, which is fundamentally focused on infrastructure and operations. I also do a little on the dev side with platform teams and developer experience. But my passion since I joined Forrester, just short of 2 years now, has really been around knowledge management and building up a good amount of research related to knowledge management with Forrester.
Okay. And just a level set, when you say knowledge management, is that any type of knowledge, all kind of knowledge, and then, and then I want to understand like the evolution, like depending on what you say, I want to know like where it has been and maybe where it's going.
Sure. My initial focus around knowledge management has always been part of IT service management because there is a core process-related importance of knowledge management to the infrastructure and operations group. So, for example, something like I'm taking a support call, an internal employee is calling me, I'm looking up in a knowledge base, a potential resolution for resolving that. So that's really my core focus. But knowledge management is a enterprise process. If you think about it, it's not data management. It's really about surfacing the right information to support decision-making across the enterprise. And sometimes that means that you have access to knowledge that's outside of the core systems that you're using, but it's instrumental to helping to support decisions that you may be making. So it is an enterprise level type of process. One of the...
All right.
You asked me 2 parts there, Scott, so I only got the first part done.
And because I was already jumping the gun, right? So,
we're just so excited about the content.
I know, like knowledge, I manage our own knowledge management stuff, right? Because I write everything down because I get a lot of where is, what is questions. But, a lot of it's manual, right? So I would assume that we're going to move from a manual, like updating and maintenance to, AI. Is AI just going to generate all this for us?
Well, I think first we have to look at existing knowledge management practices because most organizations have what I call a waterfall type of an approach where the creation and perfection and sharing of knowledge takes way too long. So instead of it being available right away when it's most likely needed, when people are asking questions, it's not ready for a couple weeks, maybe a month or so. And so that waterfall type of an approach means that we're not surfacing knowledge fast enough. So I advocate for an agile knowledge management practice where organizations are focused on not just creating knowledge within workflows, but also surfacing that knowledge as quickly as possible. Even though it may be imperfect knowledge, it's available immediately. So we're getting the information out as quickly as possible to those people who need it to support decision making. Before we can jump to the generative AI influence, organizations need to have a good practice in place because there is this need to be able to train an LLM or fine-tune an LLM on relevant information. So if you don't have a really good knowledge management practice today, you're going to introduce issues when you go to fine-tune that LLM. So by building an agile knowledge management practice, everyone is focused on that as being a core part of doing their job. We're storing, we're perfecting as we're using knowledge. If you stumble upon something and you realize it's not correct, you have to take ownership for that. So KCS is a great agile knowledge management an example of applying that within service and support organizations. So you really have to have this more of an agile practice where everyone's focused on knowledge so that it's relevant and up to date. And then we can start, kind of talking about how generative AI will influence that.
Yeah. When you say agile, can you quantify that? Is it a month, a week, a day, an hour, a minute, a second? Like what do you mean?
Well, really, knowledge should be available immediately. And I know that kind of worries some people. Well, what happens if it's inaccurate? The way to fix knowledge and make it work and make it effective is by using it when you need it. So if I spend all this time perfecting a knowledge article, right? So the waterfall approach where, knowledge looks a lot like Word documents, and a Word document takes a lot to perfect. There's all types of controls around spelling and subject-verb agreement and the right punctuation, the right grammar, the right style guide. That kind of stuff, you're trying to perfect knowledge prior to allowing people to use it. So what happens if no one ever uses that knowledge article? All that time that you've spent perfecting it is time wasted. So with an agile approach, we're really focused on knowledge as part of demand. If someone calls in or someone has a question of another employee, you can capture that real time. But if somebody never asks that question again, we don't spend any time perfecting it. If someone does, then it's that person's responsibility who has now surfaced that information to make sure it's accurate and make sure, that it's correct. So we're perfecting in our workflows as opposed to perfecting outside of those workflows. So it economizes the effort that we put into knowledge management. The knowledge articles should look more like PowerPoint slides as opposed to Word documents, right? There's a big difference in the structure, but also the way that we write a PowerPoint slide. It's just going to be a brief statement. It's not necessarily a sentence. It's just enough information to get the point across. Some people use a lot of words on slides. I am referring to the more simple slide approach. But, when you think about just the contrast of a Word document to a PowerPoint slide, you can see how it's easier to create while you're working. It's easier to read. Your keywords and stuff are better. You get better findability because it's more simple type of text. So all the value we get from an agile knowledge management practice means it's just-in-time knowledge. It's just what I need to know to get my answer, and everybody's responsible for keeping that knowledge up to date. And it works. It's an effective way to manage knowledge in an organization.
Yeah, I would imagine, and the nature of my question was really geared because now that everyone has a mobile device and we can generate our own, content, or, you could call it knowledge. We're used to, and we're conditioned now, we can get real-time information on almost anything, but at work, it's just so much slower, right? So, I really wanted to get an idea of, the hour, day, week, month kind of time frame, because I think it's important, especially as things change so fast. Because now we have, now I think we can get into the generative AI aspect of this. Is like people have played with the public Gen AI tools like Bard or ChatGPT, and their expectation is shifting again. So, how have the advancements in all the LLMs and the Gen AI products, how is that changing knowledge management? And how do you think it's going to change? Talk to me about that.
Sure. So I think one of the most positive use cases I see for generative AI is really around knowledge management. And especially if we're able to bring an LLM internal to the organization and we're not worried about, data policies or data governance, right? We're only using it internally. The capabilities of generative AI have a tremendous impact on that agility within knowledge management. For example, one of the greatest capabilities is now the search. So searching was often very difficult to do because, an end user or an internal employee might ask a question very different than the way that a technology person might ask a question, right? My favorite example of this is my stepfather used to call me all the time for support, and he'd say, "Julie, the internet's down," right? Well, I knew the internet wasn't down. However, right, in my context, that was he's having network connectivity issues. But if he found a knowledge article when he typed in "internet is down" that was, had the title of network connectivity, he would never click on it. He would be scared to actually, that he might do something wrong.
Yeah, the big ocean cable got cut in half, right?
Yeah. So, now an end user can search using their language. And because the LLMs have this training on such a large corpus of language, it can understand and match, an intent with a response that's very relevant to that end user's question. With a carefully engineered prompt, it can also respond in a way that meets that end user where they are. So I might say, explain network connectivity as if you were talking to a 5-year-old, right? That would be a much easier way for that end user to be able to use that knowledge. So the search capabilities are just tremendous because of that language understanding. Then you get into, things like the ability to create new knowledge articles. So again, I can create a prompt that says, based upon this transaction with an end user or with a customer, take these fields that I've populated within Salesforce or within my IT service management system, take these fields and put them into this following knowledge template. And this is all done with a click of a button. So instead of the individual having to craft a knowledge article from scratch, they're basically given a draft that they can look at and go, "Yep, that works." So generative AI can actually accelerate that agility within a knowledge management practice, and it can overcome some of those hurdles that we've always traditionally seen in knowledge management practices.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect that I hadn't considered us talking about today was, your example of taking the customer interaction and putting that inside a prompt also with maybe an existing template, right? Because that's a very complicated prompt that the general like customer service or ITSM person may not think about, right? Like, hey, write me a knowledge article, but then the LLM lacks the context. Like you provided like all of the context in that example. And I think that's important. And that in itself should be a knowledge article, right? It's like how to prompt these things, because if you don't have the right context, we're talking about network versus internet. Like, yeah, that's something I hadn't really connected with. And then the 5-year-old, 5-year-old's just looking around for power outlets, right? Because it's, conditioned on the battery of their, device. So I think that is important for people to understand generating the context, for your prompt, right? Because that's a big deal.
Yeah, I was able to kind of look at the power of the LLM from a very specific use case. So about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more now, I built a bot from scratch. I wanted to know what it takes to build it. It was when chatbots were just coming out in the industry. So I had a corpus of knowledge that I wanted to use to train this bot. And it was a monstrous amount of work, right? First of all, inputting that information, but then making sure that it was matching the right intent with the right responses took quite a while. And the variety of questions that came in through the chatbot, the more work that I had to do to connect the intents before the system could actually do it on its own. It was a very lengthy project. I don't know that I ever got to the point where that chatbot worked the way that I wanted to. When I look at the new capabilities, just the language understanding that comes with generative AI it's just a game changer, right? I no longer have to worry about, maybe I have a greeting that says, you say hello, then I respond hi. How many different ways can you say hello? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, right? There's just so many different ways that you can say something in the English language. And so the LLM understands that and can match what the context is of the question to the context of the response. It's incredibly powerful compared to where we were when I built that chatbot a long time ago. So, there's so much possibility there with the LLM, especially around transactional interactions, right? You're asking me a question and I'm providing you a response. That's something that can be reused by an organization. And the best way to make that possible is to have generative AI in that loop, helping to create and to surface that for other people that are asking similar questions.
So in your chatbot, like you were mapping the intent manually, right? The first time you saw an intent, you had to fix your bot and edit that. Is that what you were doing?
Some of it was, when I uploaded, because you can put some information into the system at the beginning, some of it was already matched. The stuff that I had the most difficult time with was when because I encouraged people to go and try the bot, because the more you interact with it, the more you can see where its failure points are, that you need to either add knowledge or correct those intent mappings that are incorrect. So when people started playing around with it, they were asking questions that were out of scope, right? They were asking questions in so many different ways that it didn't quite understand yet. And just one person mapping intents and responses, it was a lot of work for one individual. I would imagine if you have a team of people, you're able to get that up and running a lot more quickly. But I was able, as one person, to upload the same corpus of information that I had before, plus I pointed it at specific websites. And it was, it's just a difference of night and day. I could ask it questions that before it would always respond, I don't know. Now it makes an attempt to answer that and can actually point to, this is my answer. And oh, by the way, this is where I pulled that information from. So you can actually go and follow the trail of how it answered that question. And so instead of just spitting back a canned response, it's actually writing it in real language response. It's taking what it finds and puts it into language that's easy to understand. It's just a very different way to look at knowledge management, and it takes away a lot of the hurdles that we've had about people not being able to understand it. You could, in an interaction, say, "Can you state that a little, with more simple language? I don't understand," right? And the LLM will make will rephrase it in more simple language so that you can understand it. We couldn't do that before with a chatbot. It would say, I don't know. So the capabilities that we see with this around knowledge management are incredible. And I it's evident in the industry where we see a lot of vendors jumping full on with generative AI around knowledge management.
Do you think so? If you think about organizations that had chatbots or some type of conversational product, that they have that today, and they've had it for years, right? And they have a team that builds that. So they were in your same situation. How do you think those organizations are different than the people that now see generative AI and they're like, hey, this is cool. I think I can really use this, but they don't have those teams set up. Do you think they're on par with each other, or do you think someone that understands kind of that intent, do they have a head start because they have a team and resources to do it, or can the others catch up if they're behind?
So there's really two parts of that response. So prior to generative AI, if someone wanted to adopt a chatbot, it would probably take them a good 2 years to get a product that they could be confident with. Now you can build something that's going to be, a game changer in the environment much more quickly, and the time that it takes to get there is going to be less. So it's hard to compare from an adoption perspective. They're certainly not going to have to wait for those 2 years. But what we do see is a difference is the quality of the data that you're actually using to train the LLM or to fine tune the LLM, because it's already been trained on a very large corpus of human language. So if you have an existing practice that has a good knowledge base that is current, up to date, the information is relevant, a team has been nurturing it and keeping it effective within the environment, then your adoption of generative AI is only going to make that 10 times better. It may mean that that team can focus on new types of knowledge. Maybe they can focus on storytelling, the stuff that's not easily documented. The explicit knowledge is the prime area in which organizations focus on in a knowledge management practice, but it's the more the tacit knowledge, the knowledge that we learn while we're doing things that doesn't necessarily get written down, that really attributes to our experience. Maybe they can begin focusing on more of that tacit knowledge, the stuff that's not easily documented. So I look at this as something that can make an existing practice that's well off and doing a great job. It can only magnify its impact across the organization. It will lessen some of the burden, obviously, around the maintenance and creation of knowledge, but it'll just make it more impactful overall. So the organizations that don't have a knowledge management practice, they will struggle because you have to fine tune it on your knowledge. So if you don't have quality data today, how are you going to fine tune that model for your specific environment? That's going to be, the game changer is, you may not have a great knowledge management practice today or a good chat bot, but maybe you do have some sources of data that are highly reliable that you can use for the training. So without that data, your adoption of a new chatbot is going to take a little bit longer. If you've got good data, you're going to be able to close the gap much easier than you could have in the past, for sure.
All right. Well, cool. I think I think I want to show somebody maybe what this would look like. So appreciate the setup here. So what I'm going to do is go through, maybe an employee goes to a SharePoint site. This is our internal SharePoint site, and I've got these demo documents of human resources, right? So if an employee has a question, they're either stuck, reviewing all these Word docs, looking for their answer. So say, for instance, I'm looking for if there is a policy on maternity leave or something like that. My kids are way older. I would not do that. But so maybe, someone that's unfamiliar, I got to read through here. Oh, I basically find this and, I got to read through it and see how it applies, right?
Well, Scott, if you look at it, what are you showing me? Remember, you're showing me Word documents. It's hard to find the actual answer to your question. They're hard to navigate for sure.
Yeah. So the Word documents, they can be either in, they can be the Word documents or they're in OneDrive, right? So a lot of people will have these. They may or may not be updated. I got to figure out where my answer is based on my question, based on the title. Hopefully they're titled correctly. This one's pretty straightforward. Jury duty, parking, paydays. Like I would never look for payday because I would use payroll or paycheck or something. Paydays, that's odd to me. But you're right. Like the NLU would stop that, right? And kind of convert that person from payday, payroll to payday to paycheck. So the advancements are incredible. But what this would look like if I go into an LLM type interface, right, a conversational interface, this happens to be Krista, and say I wanted to have a question about the maternity leave. Right. So what I've done is I've taken all those Word documents and I've just put it in here. So this is a front end to all of those Word docs to help employees find information. So maybe I have a question for HR, and this could be I'm used to asking my HR representative everything, and they're kind of like the IT support desk with the internet connectivity, right, at your father-in-law's house. But it says, hello, Scott, ask me a question about, we just typed this as NewCo, right? New company HR policies, and I'll look it up for you. So I have a question, do we receive, what did I say? Maternity or paternity, maybe, benefits. And I'll ask that question. And then here's my question, do we receive benefits? Yes, employees may be entitled to maternity or paternity benefits under the Family and Medical Leave Act. Okay, I wouldn't have ever searched for that. So do you want to request leave? Yeah. What type? Just confirm, I want to do this maternity leave. How many hours? So I want to take off, I'm a full-timer, so I'll take off 40 hours. And well, that's cool. So thanks. Let me look up your leave balances from the payroll system. So it takes that next step. One, it answers my question. Two, it lets me know if I'm available. And then three, it's actually checking the payroll system to see if I have enough time off to do this, right? So I got 64 vacation hours, 40 sick leave hours, and it says, congratulations, maternity leave. It's part of our policy. You can take 12 weeks plus vacation. Oh, okay. Well, I didn't really know that I
was going to say, Scott, 40 hours is not nearly enough.
Yeah. I was like, 12 weeks, right? It sets my whole expectation, right? Because I'm just driving back and forth to the hospital, right? No, it doesn't put me out at all. The whole different ballgame for our mothers. But then it asked me, okay, maternity leave start date. Well, that's cool. So I'm going to start this next Monday. And okay, so maternity leave start date, it writes that into the payroll system. Scott's going to be out. And thank you, your manager has been notified, and I've started the process for the Family Medical Leave Act. So that's pretty cool in terms of tying it all together in a process. So it's kind of like your knowledge management processes could be more intelligent with generative AI. But if the AI can help you do something in the process, I think that's just as valuable or more valuable. What do you think, Julie?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the responses, right, we're essentially giving the answer. We're not knowledge articles or documents, especially. Documents are hard to read. So instead of going to a document and copying and pasting a specific paragraph, It's just giving you a real answer, like you were actually talking to someone. Hey, Scott, this is, you get 40 hours for maternity leave.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I guess I should change my script, right? 40 hours. So how many? So 12, right? So maybe I'll ask for, 120 hours next time.
yeah. So, it just makes the transactions so much better. But the behind the scenes, you haven't had to write that script, right? You haven't had to create a response that's human-like, right? A lot of times those chatbots that we've had in the past just pointed to, oh, this knowledge article might be able to help you, or this document might have your answer. Or if you didn't point to something, then you had to kind of have a written response within the system. So this is so much more conversational. Like the transactions are going to feel more personal. They're going to use your name. They're going to be able to say, based on information that we've pulled from this system, you're eligible for XYZ. That's a transaction that, while automated, is still human-like. And I think that's a really important part of what generative AI is bringing, is that ability to understand the human language means that your responses that you get from a machine are going to be so much more human-like within those transactions.
Yeah, conversation is the first form of communication, right? It preceded the written languages. So if you can converse in natural language and with a machine, and you're comfortable with that, things are going to go much, much faster. And we should be able to receive, one, better support at work, two, better support with our vendor interactions, because think about knowledge management. The hardest part is, I'm thinking customer support, right? The turnover in those organizations are so high because the job is so hard, because the information is in so many places. Like, they just shove so much on those type of organizations. Something like this just makes it easier for all parties involved.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you talked about the imperfect knowledge. You should have a good knowledge management, at least some type of portal or documents. Start from somewhere, and then what do we do with, like, say we do that, right? And then you talked about data governance a little bit. You don't have to worry about data governance if you have kind of all this in a private environment. What other controls would be appropriate, outside of data governance? Anything come to mind?
I think there's a philosophy here that we need to talk about, which is the perfect versus imperfect knowledge. Organizations have often viewed that there is a risk associated with sharing imperfect knowledge, right? So that's why we spend so much time focused on perfecting knowledge. It needs to be exactly right before we can share it with someone. And, that length of time that it takes to perfect is, as I said earlier, it's a lot of wasted time and effort.
Yeah.
So one of the problems that we see with generative AI, and it gets a lot of press, is around hallucinations, right? Well, what happens if it surfaces imperfect information? And my response to that is always, I've asked humans questions over the years and got imperfect answers, right? It's not perfect should not be our goal. We should treat all knowledge as being imperfect, meaning that even if you get a question from someone or you get an answer from someone and you try that answer and it doesn't work, right? We know, okay, that's not a trusted answer. I need to go ask someone else. So if we treat knowledge as imperfect, we have an ability to provide more governance in the environment. So if I'm the first person that created the draft by using the LLM, right, create a knowledge article from this transaction, that should go into a state that tells everyone who surfaces that knowledge that this is a draft. right? You're basically communicating to everybody, hey, this is imperfect knowledge. But if you use it and it works, we can change the status now to this has been validated, right? This is very much the KCS approach, knowledge-centered service approach to knowledge management. But once we change that state, we're basically saying, look, we created a draft, we've used it a second time and it's worked. Now we know that this can be used by a broader audience so that you can increase the visibility. So while knowledge is in this imperfect state as it's being created and generated by generative AI, we keep the visibility restricted until it's been used a couple times by our trusted people, and then it can expand its visibility. So instead of thinking of controls where it's got to go through this lengthy process before it can be used by anyone, we're perfecting it. We want to build a process that views all knowledge as imperfect, and as we're interacting with it, we're improving it and we're making sure that it works and we can expand its visibility. So that's a control that's built into the process so that as we're using knowledge, we're perfecting it, as opposed to, spending all this time and effort to perfect it before it can be shared.
Yeah, I think, maybe there's a false expectation on how much to trust this, out of the gate. If you're chasing perfection, it's because you don't really trust it. But, labeling something as a draft at least gets it out there and it lets other people build trust over time. Because, nobody's going to turn this on from 0 to 100, right? There's going to be some type of gate, or human in the loop type concept to check to make sure this works. Because otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for failure because you don't know, right? So just, I think, being comfortable with it, with the draft concept and just building trust over time. That's important, especially with the hallucinations. We get a lot of questions about hallucinations as well. But you just have to limit, like you were talking about the corpus of data, just limit it to your own systems and at least you'll become more comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think organizations that are tackling this with less than reliable data for the fine tuning are going to have more hallucinations at the beginning. And I also think if they're still relying on waterfall practices, that will continue longer than it needs to. That's why I very much think that the Agile knowledge management practice with trusted data as an input to an LLM is the accelerator. If you don't have that, if you're still in a waterfall environment, you don't have quality of data, then your journey with generative AI is just going to take longer. But the mistake would be to try to create perfect knowledge. To me, that's not taking advantage of what generative AI can do. You're basically saying generative AI has to adapt to our practice, and our practices are out of date. Agility is really important in the modern enterprise. We have to be responsive. We need decision-making that is going to be all over the place. It's not standard question and answers anymore. Most of that stuff's answered with FAQs on website. It's the new stuff coming in that we've never heard before, or maybe we launched a new product and it's got an issue and customers are complaining about it. Knowledge has to be agile. It has to keep up with the pace of the market and of the industry and of the company. And that's not a waterfall practice. It has to be an agile knowledge management practice.
I can imagine two sections of the website, right? It's the FAQ, like you said, the frequently asked questions. There should be another section, the questions that were asked today, right? That aren't in the list, right? Because I think when the internet came out, you were able to catch up with a website. When mobile came out, you were able to, kind of be a late adopter or a laggard with a mobile app. With AI, I don't think you're afforded the same amount of time to catch up, right? So creating perfect knowledge is just going to delay the inevitable, right? And hopefully people understand that. So Outside of the hallucinations, because I would imagine a lot of people ask you about that. What what are companies or people that you interact with? What are they asking you about this process?
We get a lot of questions around how can we leverage, generative AI in a knowledge management practice. And, this is an emerging field and there is a lot of flux going on right now. There's a lot of new startup companies, there's a lot of organization, there are companies out there that have been experimenting with chat GPT long before 3.5 and 4.0 came out. The thing that I think is the most risk is right now not embracing it because employees, they're reading all the hype. They're trying, it's easy enough to go and explore and start using this stuff in an unprotected environment, outside of your firewall. So by beginning and exploring this as quickly as you can with your vendors that are trusted, with your data that's already got the tight controls around it, you're likely to get the best benefit from, utilizing generative AI as quickly as possible. Where you want to be cautious, we have had a lot of companies interested in building their own LLMs. And, that's a whole new level of complexity because, first of all, skill sets are in great demand around generative AI. And most of the people that have a broad amount of experience are going with vendors or, they want to be leaders in the market. They don't want to be, working for smaller companies. They know they can get really high salaries by going externally. So there's a knowledge gap right now around the skill sets around training an LLM. So smaller to mid-sized organizations are going to struggle with building an LLM internally just because of the skills gap problem. And if you don't have the right skill sets, now you're introducing risk because maybe somebody configures it in the wrong way, and now your data is being shared in a way that you don't want it to. So building your own is definitely a little bit more risky than, going with a vendor that has a proven track record for securing that data and protecting your information today.
Yeah, I think somebody with a large IT organization, I think that's almost their reflex, right? Like I can build this myself. Whereas, you wouldn't build your own payroll system or your own CRM system. I wouldn't advise anyone to build your own LLM because it's a lot of heavy lifting. It's going to be expensive. And it's going to be more complex than probably needs to be.
You brought up a really good point, which is expense. People need to understand that this is expensive. The cost of the compute alone makes a lot of the solutions out there, you're going to, depending on the vendor that you go with, that cost is either included into the product and the product is going to be more expensive, or you have to have a relationship with the LLM provider where you're paying for the compute. So we're still figuring that part out. This is an expensive frontier. It's expensive from a transactional perspective, the CPUs and, that it takes, the GPUs that it takes to generate the responses and stuff. It's a significant cost related to this and an environmental impact. So while it is one of the most exciting frontiers that I've seen in my career, we also have to understand that, yes, this is expensive at the moment, and it is, it does have an environmental impact. Now, a lot of the vendors are very focused on that and wanting to have some amount of focus on, saving the planet, green technology, as opposed to just spend. But that will have to play out in the industry as we move forward. It's definitely an expensive endeavor to go down.
Yeah. I've seen estimates online where someone was hosting an open source model and they were using it so much, it was $35,000 a month And then on the other hand, I've seen estimates like just to run ChatGPT is like $1 million a day. And I can't imagine the heat that the GPUs are putting off, and then the type of electricity to try to cool that, right, to counteract the heat. But
and water.
yeah, huge, and water, right? Huge environmental impact that we'll see what that happens, right? But
it also tracks back, Scott, to if you're building your own LLM, which partner do you go with?
Yeah.
Right? Because depending on your type of knowledge, a specific LLM may work for one corpus and another LLM may work better for another set of data. So there's still a lot of experimentation going on here in organizations, that they have to find the right solution that works for them, and for the type of data that they have. I know that, OpenAI has a lot of press because they kind of launched this surprise to the AI community, and they get a lot of press, and a lot of other vendors are trying to catch up. But really, you have to look at the LLM model itself and whether it uniquely serves the needs of your organization, and partner with the right companies. So it's a tricky place to navigate right now.
Yeah, that's an important point. Chris and I ran a test with 3 different LLMs against the same set of data, and we found the Google model outperforms the OpenAI models, especially when we were asking questions about tabular data. It just performed much better, and so we've got a whole episode and a paper on that. So if anybody's interested in that, definitely take a look at the test. You can see all of our results. It's really, really pretty interesting. Well, thanks, Julie. I really appreciate you talking with me about agile knowledge management and how GenAI may affect this. And interestingly enough, we talked about the environmental impact, right? I live in Dallas. It gets hot all the time, so I'm always cognizant of the heat. But I really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining me.
This was awesome. Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate being part of it.